Welcome, everyone. I think just to give a little bit of intro of myself for those who've perhaps not met. So my name's Josh Daniels. I've been in the ecosystem for about a year now, actually, as one of the leads for Protocol Labs Filecoin Impact Fund, PLFIF, which really has the remit of focusing on supporting and developing public goods funding models and sort of initiatives across the ecosystem. And so really excited to spend some time here really speaking to you all about sort of the future of funding and how we're thinking about the evolution as part of this roadmap that we've been developing. Basically, just to kind of give a little bit of a recap of the PGF programs that we've been running. So the existing mechanisms that are in place right now are Phil Pro PGF, which was a transition from the PLFIF grants, FF grants, meaning Filecoin Foundation grants, and then Phil Retro PGF, which is developed. And so we've been able to really kind of hone these programs over the initial batch for Pro PGF and the last two rounds, and now the open third round for Retro PGF, which we'll be hearing more about a little bit later. And so what we're excited about as we think about the next phase, which we'll be speaking more about, is really how we can sort of, better measure impact across these public goods funding mechanisms and how we can think about sort of protocol-based sort of funding support for these mechanisms as we develop and build. So I think one of the things that we're looking at now is kind of where's the structure of the Phil PGF network in terms of structure of funding and how funding works. So I think from our standpoint, what we've really done over the last 6 or so months, in the last couple of quarters, is taken the ability to sort of build out a specific public goods funding entity, which now supports directly Phil Retro and Phil Pro PGF mechanisms. And so that entity is called Blue Shift Foundation. It's a Cayman-based entity. We'll be speaking more about sort of the vision and the thinking around that. But the idea is that this becomes the nexus point for all public goods funding initiatives and mechanism design. That doesn't mean there won't be mechanisms and the like designed outside of that, but this will really be sort of a home base for the ecosystem, really think about proactive and retroactive funding mechanisms and their development. And so it's been really great to see us, both launch Pro PGF in the last couple of quarters, but then also sort of set up this entity to really support PGF funding going forward, which was been our sort of goal from this visual as we've developed the structure. And so one of the things that I want to pass off to Sejal is to talk a little bit about how the batches have developed for Pro PGF and how we're thinking to the future in terms of our funding model. So pass it off to you, Sejal.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. So just want to share Pro PGF batch one, it allocated 3.6 million in proactive grants, which means milestone-based funding. We had total 38 projects that applied, and out of which 23 projects were shortlisted by the team, and out of that, 14 teams were funded. So just want to also give a sneak peek into what this process was. So essentially, we had 12 selection committee members who were chosen, and they had expertise in sort of assessing these projects. And once projects applied, then the committee sort of went through the reviews and sort of negotiation with the projects and gave them feedback and sort of arrived at what would be the optimal funding for each project. And as you can see, some of the projects listed here, which are I like to call it short tail projects, which are center of visibility and high impact projects, critical teams. I do want to say I'll share more about the feedback we received and some of the changes we are planning in the upcoming slides. But this is broadly, how we ran batch one. You can also go and look at the blogs, and you can also just check the Questbook site if you are interested in looking at some of the proposals directly on what teams proposed. And even proposals have comment section where you can see each reviewer sort of posting their reviews, and most of them have their interviews also recorded. So they also did interviews with the teams. So yeah, this was broadly batch one. Just want to summarize and high level share the roadmap. Phil PGF network has two pillars: Pro PGF, which is mostly Josh and myself, and of course the community, and then Retro PGF, which is Tom Onkar and the community. And the idea is to sort of over the next 18 months to 24 months, we sort of strengthen these pillars. And Pro PGF batch 2 is going to launch in early November. So a lots of changes and surprises coming, all on the blogs and will be shared. And the idea is to run, in addition to batch batch 2, batch 3 and 4, like 2 more batches in 2026 we want to run. And then from 2027, we want to get into a cadence where we're running around like every 6 months, so 2 rounds per year. And then Retro PGF round 3 is on, like applications are open. Tom will share more in his session. And cadence that Retro PGF follows is already like biannual, which is like twice in a year. And as Josh mentioned, like, the Blue Shift Foundation, which is our Cayman entity, has been launched, and really exciting because it gives us a lot of room for further experimentation and work that we want to do in PGF. And you can look out for Filecoin PGF thesis, which will be published in November, and we will talk more about it in IRL FTS. And then, of course, the whole thing about like upgrading Filecoin to move towards network owned funding, what that would look like is also something that you can expect in 2026 and discussions IRL in Buenos Aires. So yes, and just like definitely want to point you all towards the blogs, filecoin.io/blogs. You can look at the detailed versions of pretty much everything that we're talking about here. So selection committee feedback, role, and experience. So like I mentioned, wanted to share some of the feedback that we received. So the first one is negotiation challenges. Like I mentioned, like all reviewers had, when they interviewed the project. So they went through this period of negotiation where they sort of went back and forth on, okay, these are the things that should be listed. These are the things which are unrealistic, right? So it obviously took a lot of time of them, but this is something that is critical. So we are sort of figuring out like what would be the optimal path forward where reviewers don't end up spending a ton of their time, but at the same time, this negotiation is very critical because these are the critical teams that are funded through the program. And as you can see, the next point, which sort of builds on top of the first one, like workload, right? Because we initially had expected the workload of reviewers will be 2-3 hours per week, but it ended up to be 10 to 12 hours, all because obviously reviewers, like they did a lot of due diligence, so huge shout out to them. And but at the same time, like this just led to a lot of their workload increase in the workload. And then again, just the third point, building on top of the first two, which is like they went beyond just reviewing, right? So because given the funding, the amount that is going out is also large, and these are very critical teams, so hence it's important for reviewers to sort of make sure the proposal is sort of correctly put together, and the commitments they're asking or the funding that is asked is reasonable. And hence they had to ask the teams to sort of rework in some situations and maybe bring down the funding or increase the funding. In fact, we had a project which had asked for a little less, so that is basically that went into it. And then of course, one of the things that we want to do is, right now we have a group of selection committee members which is 12 members, but how can we enable community to actually step in and increase this? So just not only like a small group of people have influence over how much funding who is getting, but increase it by a significant number. Just like retro badge holders are like 30-40 badge holders, that would be the goal, to also like open call for reviewers who can join in evaluating the. And so some of the planned improvements for batch 2. So the idea would be to start review cycle earlier. So we're planning to definitely like, some alpha here that, we will have applications wrapped up by first week of December or something. And then we will have a lot of period for reviewers to review. We will have around 3 to 4 weeks, almost a month in January for reviewers to take their time, schedule interviews, and, have review the projects on their pace, and so they are still doing the due diligence. The idea is to sort of see like, how we can include people who are also not in the committee, right? How can we make sure like community also has a say in, maybe they review the milestones, they also help reviewers in sort of reviewing the proposals, right? And then we have more like clear rubrics. So basically the idea is like, one is that you review the proposal, one is that you have rubric where you have to just like go line by line and sort of see whether this proposal meets those requirements. So idea would be to also help reviewers use those more so that it's easier, and they're able to do in the right way and still like in aligned with the program goals. And also another thing is basically one of the feedback was like, okay, what are these proposals sort of asking? Like, of course, they knew what are they asking for, but how do we ensure like this is aligned with the ecosystem growth? How do we ensure what are the metrics? How do we evaluate? So for good evaluation to happen, there has to be really clear goals and really like focused areas in which the funding flows. Hence, we will be introducing new tracks, TBD, like more alpha here, but like these are going to be 2 to 3 tracks, and we will announce more in the upcoming weeks. So this will help reviewers to decide, okay, this is the track which I feel more expertise in, and this is where I can review projects better. So yeah, these are some of the improvements and more on the blogs getting published soon. Yeah, so not going to go too much into detail, but like I said, suggestions, these are the suggestions that reviewers had suggested. And these are some of the improvements that, we sort of want to do, which is like more window for review, defining clear KPIs, and and also meet in real life in Buenos Aires to discuss more.
Okay, so I'm going to say a few words about full retro PGF over the next 5 minutes. We're going to talk about the journey so far, round three updates, and what we're looking forward to after that. So, in a nutshell, in full retro PGF, we really started this whole process in around February 2024. And by June 2024, this was the current state then. So you could see we had 224,000 fill pledged by Titan, Web3 Mine, Filecoin Foundation, and Protocol Labs. And by June 2024, we ended up receiving over 132 nominations. And after a process of voting by a committee of 25 badge holders, we ended up with 95 projects that met quorum and ended up getting funded. So I think that was a fantastic start, and it wasn't without its hiccups. But you can see, I mean, if you look at this image, you can see there were a number of fantastic projects funded here, and a good selection across the different categories that the round seeks to fund, from collective governance, protocol research and development, infra depth tooling, utilities, education, and outreach. So with a lot of learning under our belts, Full Retro PGF 2 carried the torch on from Full Retro PGF 1, and in Full Retro PGF 2 we scaled up substantially. So we scaled up to 300,000 fill donated by Protocol Labs, Filecoin Foundation, and Holon Global, and we ended up with a substantial number of projects being showcased. Again, increased the number of badge holders, fantastic momentum and trajectory, and about 97 projects ended up getting funded with a good spread over all of the different categories here. And a really nice thing that we introduced in round two was we started a collaboration with Drips to help with the distribution. And the Drips team they're a great team, also very philosophically aligned with Filecoin, the principles of open source software development. And beyond simply making the distribution easier, this also allowed us to form what you can see is a kind of impact funding dependency graph. So if you go on the filecoin.drips.network site, you can see it's super transparent. You can see where all of the funding has went, and to what teams, and whether or not they've floated on, which they should. So this is just like a super nice feature, and this is very much the direction we want to keep going in. Something we think a lot about is, to what extent is it really working? How impactful is it, and how can we improve it? In general, this is a super difficult question to answer, and it is one we need a lot of help with. But we can at least point to some very good indicators. So we had a few great spotlights today already. And I think if we just look at the projects that were funded in round two by Full Retro PGF, these are demonstrably excellent projects getting high amounts. So projects like Curio, Spark, Randomoo, Glyphnodes/Chainlove, and Lighthouse. So these projects received a relatively substantial amount of funding, but we also had a long chain of funding. Not a long chain, excuse me, a long tail. And so projects got funded, even just a few hundred fill. And if you're just starting out, very small project, maybe this is the difference between continuing and not continuing. So that's great. And I think, of course, we want to scale up to more significant amounts. That's important. But I think this also acts as like a very good signaling mechanism. If you can say, hey, I built this in the Filecoin ecosystem, and I was judged by a group of my expert peers, and they said I was the best, or the second best, or the third best. That's a great signal to bring to other funders, whether it's VCs or otherwise, to get more funding. Uh, so in terms of other indicators, we had a good level of interest in terms of social media. So you can see there's thousands of likes for Full Retro PGF related posts. So that's great. We had a couple of prediction markets that were set up. So potentially some questionable incentives around that, but we live in interesting and exciting new times, and I think there's not much we can do about that. So that's always interesting to see. We also seen a number of other great things like the Gelato implementation. We got Ethereum attestation service on Filecoin Virtual Machine, and in general, the program was pretty efficient. At least in rounds 1 and 2, we were well below 10% in terms of the cost, which is extremely competitive for a kind of grants program. So round 3 updates. So there are a number of things we wanted to update on going into round 3. I guess the top line update is that we're scaling up the amount of funding again. So almost 600K fill has been donated by Filecoin Impact Foundation, Filecoin Foundation, and Lotus Ponds. That's absolutely fantastic. We'll continue to keep on scaling up the pool of badge holders. In addition, we're doing a lot of work around clearer metrics and clearer guidance for badge holders. As Josh mentioned earlier, we've done a lot of work actually in the back end in terms of making the whole process around public goods funding in the network much more robust by having a foundation set up now to manage this. So that's absolutely fantastic, and we really want to keep pushing in that direction. Also, to keep making everything more robust with more decentralized decision making going into this. And trying to get more sustainable sources of funding. Because currently, so far, for Full Retro PGF, it's very much relied on donations. And we do intend to keep scaling and expect it to grow in Retro PGF 4, but we just want to make sure everything is sustainable. Okay. One final thing to call out for round 3 that I think is fantastic. So this time we've got a new platform. So we had a fantastic platform from Gitcoin in rounds 1 and 2. Now we're building on that, and we've got a new platform that the Drips team have produced for us. So hopefully it'll be an even smoother experience for applicants. Just finally to say for round 3 and beyond, the timeline for round 3 is applications are open now. Please submit an application. The voting phase will start pretty sharpish in just a couple of weeks, and we'll seek to make the distributions as soon as possible in December. Ideally, that is the plan. So you can see the timeline here on the right-hand side. In terms of the timeline beyond this, we're expecting Full Retro PGF 4 to kick off in March 2026. The plan is to grow and at least maintain the same level of funding, but ideally grow. And as I said, look at new and sustainable means of funding the program. And whereas round 3, there has been a ton of changes in the back end, but really it was attempting to stabilize. Whereas for round 4, I think we're going to be much more open-minded whenever it comes to experimentation. So throw all of your ideas at us, and we very much like to test out some new things. Thank you very much for your time.
So one of the things that we spoke about earlier in this sort of section was around as we looked at sort of the visual of how we're developing and maturing the system for funding. One of the things that was important was setting up a PGF focused entity to support that funding and really set it with a clear mandate. And so we were able to set that foundation up and have it become fully operational over the last several months. And big shout out and thanks to many folks, including Sejal, Tom, Monica, and many others that were part of that process of scaling and setting up that foundation. But it's called the Blue Shift Foundation. Obviously focused on sort of blue funding initiatives and public good funding initiatives in the Filecoin ecosystem. And so you can see here some of the details and sort of the ways that we're thinking about it. And the goal is that we're ultimately going to be putting out towards the end of this month, early next month, a more robust sort of charter slash thesis document for the foundation to make sure people have clarity on sort of our goals and mission and can hold us accountable as a foundation as we move forward to support public goods. But really, you can see this is the sort of mechanism or nexus point for the development of public goods funding mechanisms, primarily focused with Pro and Retro PGF to start, but then there will be sort of innovations and developments that will run through this foundation, working with PLFIF and others in the ecosystem as we hone in and develop. And so you can see here some of the dynamics, but the view is right now that foundation is funded by donations from PLFIF, and we're actually going to be working with Filecoin Foundation in the future to target a sort of donation from their side to support, again, the mechanisms that are currently being evolved and developed, but then also as we think about more development of protocol-based funding mechanisms in the future. So when we talk about protocol level public goods funding, really what we're focused on here is saying that as an ecosystem, we don't want to be solely reliant upon donations from some of the more core entities in the ecosystem like Protocol Labs, Filecoin Impact Fund, or the Filecoin Foundation, or others like Holon and others in the Open Impact Foundation who've supported via donations to really build out protocol level or sort of the PGF mechanisms in the ecosystem. What we want to move towards is having a self-sustaining, community-driven, fully transparent and on-chain mechanisms by 2027. And so why is this important? You might imagine, A, it ensures that there's independence and long-term sustainability for core infrastructure and research and governance therein. It also shifts us as a whole holistic ecosystem from our funding initiatives and goals and targets for sort of, support really not being foundation or entity led in the pure sense of the word, but really being community driven with on-chain mechanisms at the heart of that. And then again, this also aligns our network economics and growth plans that Juan spoke about sort of early on in sort of FDS today with public goods funding. And so being able to really hone in and dive in and understand what is the on-chain performance of each incremental sort of allocation of capital that we're making to projects and teams in the ecosystem, and really being able to tie that back from an on-chain perspective. Right now, we're really starting to hone in on some of the research areas where we see some core questions that are important for us to address as we sort of move into a more kind of substantive plan and go forward approach to moving public goods funding into a more protocol-based approach. One of the things is really, what is the right budget from a PGF perspective? Right now, the budgets for Pro PGF and Retro PGF are set by a number of folks across Protocol Labs and some other entities that are involved in public goods funding. But we want to make sure that we set up a system and a model that can really set that budget based upon impact and expected outcomes in terms of the funding deployed in previous rounds, but also thinking to the future of how exactly this funding can support the ecosystem. One of the other big pieces here is, where is this source of funding going to come from a protocol perspective? Is that block rewards? Is that the mining reserve, or some type of hybrid? There's still some open questions there on sort of how we want to think about that and what that sort of model looks like. One of the things we also have to think about is, how do we balance spending versus yield? So it's important to understand that as we look in a world where the primary ways why we deploy public goods funding will be in USDFC and FIL, how do we think about sort of the deployment of that, the spending of it, versus yield generation and sort of more of a treasury management model to help manage different sort of market dynamics in sort of bear or bull cycles as we've had in the past in our ecosystem? And so that'll be an important piece. And then the governance model. And so this is where we're really going to be looking to many folks in the ecosystem to contribute across all of these questions, but especially this one, in terms of how do we think about a robust and resilient governance model that can help to think through transparency and security, but also have a level of autonomy where once that funding is applied to these particular mechanisms, the mechanisms are able to operate really sort of, in a sort of reliant fashion for projects in terms of funding. And so right now we've set a high-level roadmap that really sets us up to hit our target goal, as I outlined earlier in this section, which is really moving in 2027 to a protocol-driven funding model for public goods funding mechanisms. And so right now we're in phase one, where we're looking to really develop and build an understanding of what are sort of the goals, what are sort of the different design sort of methodologies we can use, and really sort of come out of FDS in real life. We'll be running some sessions there in Argentina with a view of sort of here's some design spaces that we think are interesting with their sort of different parameters, and really get input and engagement from the ecosystem on what sort of the key goals, what are the pros and cons, and make sure we're capturing a holistic understanding of what that should look like. Then as part of phase 2 in early next year, we want to really sort of then take that time and all of the sort of feedback and engagement we've gotten to draft then an initial FIP for how exactly we would see this protocol-based system being implemented and developed and brought to bear for the ecosystem. And then phase 3 will really be taking that FIP in that sort of draft form and making sure we're really bringing the community along. We're meeting with various developers, builders, projects, entities, and leaders within the ecosystem to get their feedback and alignment, and then really driving that off of the decision table work that we're starting to do right now. And then in phase 4, which will be sort of the middle of next year, it's really the implementation prep. So again, identifying who are the kind of key stakeholders we're going to need to really be a part of developing this, modeling it, and then ultimately onboarding as related to sort of getting this to operationalize. And then as part of phase 5, really then hopefully having that proposal accepted and that FIP accepted, and then really be able to celebrate that in our next sort of birthday, our 6th birthday as an ecosystem around October. So that's sort of our rough framework and proposal roadmap. And so how to get involved. So obviously, myself, Sejal, Molly, and others have had conversations across various colos, other FDSs in Toronto, around sort of thinking about this at a high level. But now we really want to sort of galvanize a lot of that sort of dialogue and engagement into a much more structured way, which PLFIF and others will be leading. But we've set up a new Telegram group that's focused specifically on this research effort around PGF. And so please, for those joining here, feel free to join there, add your thoughts, views. We're going to be scheduling sort of open AMAs and sort of sessions to really help bring along sort of the development process. So we have a lot of the inputs to really put us in a position to drive towards success of building out a robust decision table with some concrete design opportunities during FDS in real life in Argentina. But that's really our focus. So hopefully I'll be seeing a lot of you in that chat and across other parts of the ecosystem as we really start to hone this in, because it's a big goal for public goods funding and really something we're focused on over the next several months and year.